agency interfered in the 2016 election via this social media disinformation campaign? Do you believe that?
Mr. Congressman, my disagreement with the issue is...
I think this is basically a yes or no question. Either you think so or you don't, and I don't have a lot of time, so...
Okay, well then I'm going to answer not in the sense that you're putting it.
Okay.
I think all countries engage in offensive information operations. The question is scale.
Do you believe that
the
Russia
Twitter files
in hacking, reclaiming my time? This is how it works now. I'll ask the questions and you try to provide an answer if you can.
You have to allow him to answer.
Do you believe?
The gentleman is out of order and should not be interrupting a member asking a question on our side, Mr. Chairman.
Reclaiming my time from everyone. Do you believe that Russia engaged in a hack and release campaign damaging to the Clinton campaign back in 2016? Again,
I don't know, and I would say it's irrelevant.
All right, let me ask Mr. Schellenbeck. These are pretty easy questions. That's just whether you believe it or not. Mr. Schellenbeck, same question. Do you believe that the Russian oligarch-controlled Internet Research Agency interfered in the 2016 election?
I think that they tried to.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Schellenbeck, do you believe that the Russians engaged in a hack and release campaign with respect to the damaging information they released regarding the Clinton campaign?
To the best of my awareness, that is what happened.
Okay,
yes.
Fair enough. Thank you.
That's not the same thing.
The reason
influencing.
I understand. Yeah.
Also, that material was true.
Yeah.
Let me introduce a couple of documents just to reinforce that we've got.
That is not a legitimate predicate for censorship.
Unanimous reclaiming my time.
Sure.
Gentleman's out of order. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask unanimous consent to enter the indictment in the United States versus the Internet Research Agency, U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, number 1-18-32, and also ask to enter into the record the executive summary to Volume 1 of the Mueller Report, which states, in March 2016, the GRU began hacking, this is the Russian agency, began hacking the email accounts of the Clinton campaign, volunteers and employees, including campaign chairman John Podesta. The GRU later released additional materials through the organization WikiLeaks. The presidential campaign of Donald Trump showed interest in WikiLeaks releases of the documents and welcomed their potential damage to candidate Clinton. So I've introduced these documents.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've introduced these documents, but it's clear to me that Russia's use of social media to interfere in the 2016 election created abundant reason
Okay, I think
for social media platforms to be concerned.
Gentleman's time has expired. Without objection, these documents are entered into the record. We now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to continue along, in a sense, the line we've been on just now. Mr. Taibbi, Mr. Schellenberger, I'll ask both of you. Is it fair to say Russia is a bad actor who is trying to do everything they can to undermine confidence in the United States government and in our form of democracy?
I think that's a fair statement.
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the organization in Europe, the Global Engagement Center?
Yes.
Well, it's an American.
State Department, I'm sorry. But are you familiar with the Global Engagement Center's use of European and other sources to in fact, determine where Twitter files should or shouldn't be, if you will, taken down thousands of names and Twitter files, correct?
I'm not sure that Global Engagement Center is taking down Twitter files. I actually wasn't aware of that. I'm sorry.
Well, Twitter and the FBI have used this organization and their funding. Well, let me go on to another. Stay on the path I was on. You commented that the scale mattered. Okay, would you elaborate on scale mattering in the attempt to undermine free speech?
Absolutely. If I could take this. So a great example of this is a report that the Global Engagement Center sent to Twitter and to members of the media and other platforms about what they called the pillars of Russian disinformation. Now, part of this report is what you would call, I think you would call traditional, hardcore intelligence gathering, where they made a reasoned, evidence-based case that certain sites were linked to Russian influence or linked to the Russian government. In addition to that, however, they also said that sites that, quote, generate their own momentum and have opinions that are in line with those accounts are part of a propaganda ecosystem. Now, this is just another word for guilt by association. And this is the problem with the whole idea of trying to identify which accounts are actually the Internet Research Agency and which ones are just people who followed those accounts or retweeted them. Twitter initially did not find more than a handful of IRA accounts. It wasn't until they got into an argument with the Senate Select Intelligence Committee that they came back with a different answer.
Okay, so scale matters, but let me go through a couple of quick questions that I think are part of the reason that we have this select committee. This country has political parties and people from what one might call the extreme left and extreme right. And even Congress has people that might be considered outside the main street of Republican and Democratic thinking. Those people speak regularly, and they have since our founding. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the ACLU and journalists almost always support their right to say what they believe, even if you disagree.
Absolutely.
And our Constitution says we will make no law to restrain exactly that kind of free speech.
Yes.
And that includes people who promote the idea that we should redistribute all wealth in a communist type way. As a matter of fact, we still have a communist party in the United States. Isn't that correct?
It is.
Okay, so the limit of free speech historically has been incitement to violence or anarchy, the actual overthrow of a government. Anything other than that is historically covered by the First Amendment.
Yes.
So when we look at the very nature of the State Department funding to affect domestic U.S. speech, was that speech outside the legal bounds? Did it call for insurrection or other criminal activities that would destroy our government?
No, I mean, we did not. I mean, we're not saying that that didn't happen, but we're describing people having political arguments online.
Right. So let me just, because my time's limited like everyone's. So it's suffice to say that every bit of the speech, or virtually every bit of the speech, whether foreign or domestic online, fell within the normal protections of the First Amendment, and the very act of federal dollars being used to stifle that speech is, in fact, historically what we would consider an indictment against the First Amendment protections.
Correct.
That is why we have this subcommittee. That is why we are here today. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and a great point. I now recognize the gentlelady from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Taibbi, I want to ask about journalistic ethics and information sources. The Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics asserts that journalists should avoid political activities that can compromise integrity or credibility. Being a Republican witness today certainly casts a cloud over your objectivity. But a deeper concern that I have relates to the ethics of how journalists receive and present certain information. Journalists should avoid accepting spoon-fed, cherry-picked information if it's likely to be slanted, incomplete, or designed to reach a foregone, easily disputed, or invalid conclusion. Would you agree with that?
I think it depends.
Really? You wouldn't agree that a journalist should avoid spoon-fed, cherry-picked information if it's likely to be slanted, incomplete, or designed to reach a foregone, easily disputed, or invalid conclusion?
Congresswoman, I've done probably a dozen stories involving whistleblowers. Every reported story that I've ever done across 3 decades involves sources who have motives. Every time you do a story, you're making a balancing test between the public interest.
Reclaiming my time. Thank you very much. Okay. I ask you this because before you became Elon Musk's hand-picked journalist, and pardon the oxymoron, You stated this on Joe Rogan's podcast about being spoon-fed information, and I quote, "I think that's true of any kind of journalism," and you'll see it behind me here. "I think that's true of any kind of journalism. Once you start getting handed things, then you've lost. They have you at that point, and you got to get out of that habit. You just can't cross that line." Do you still believe what you told Mr. Rogan? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes.
Good. Now, you crossed that line with the Twitter files.
No.
Elon Musk, it's my time. Please do not interrupt me. Elon Musk spoon-fed you his cherry-picked information, which you must have suspected promotes a slanted viewpoint, or at the very least generates another right-wing conspiracy theory. You violated your own standard, and you appear to have benefited from it. Before the release of the emails in August of last year, you had 661,000 Twitter followers. After the Twitter files, your followers doubled, and now it's 3 times what it was last August. I imagine your Substack readership, which is a subscription, increased significantly because of the work that you did for Elon Musk. Now, I'm not asking you to put a dollar figure on it, but it's quite obvious that you've profited from the Twitter files. You hit the jackpot on that Vegas slot machine to which you referred. That's true, isn't it?
I've also reinvested.
You've made some. No. Is it true that you have profited since you were the recipient of the Twitter files? You've made money. Yes or no?
I think it's probably a wash, honestly.
No, you have made money that you did not have before, correct?
But I've also spent money that I didn't have before. I just hired a whole group of people to
Patently
investigate.
obvious answer, reclaiming my time. Attention is a powerful drug. Eyeballs, money, prominence, attention, all of it points to problems with accuracy and credibility. And the larger point, which is social media companies are not biased against conservatives, and if anything, they ignored their own policies by allowing Trump and other MAGA extremists to post incessant lies, endangering public safety and even our democracy. Hypocrisy is the hangover of an addiction to attention. Now, I want to point out another alleged finding from the Twitter files. Mr. Schellenberger, you've referenced several times this $3.4 million that the FBI paid to Twitter in 2020 that was referenced in General Counsel Jim Baker's email. I first want to confirm that nowhere in the email does Baker say that the money was paid to censor information, take down posts, suspend accounts, or do anything relating to content moderation. Is that correct?
It is.
Thank you. But honest reporting would have explained that the $3.4 million was paid to release information, not censor it. One of my colleagues on this panel repeated your distortions and told Americans this reimbursement was used to, quote, censor certain stories. That's a flat-out lie. Mr. Schellenberger, are you aware of Section 2706 under the Stored Communications Act? It says when social media companies comply with subpoenas, warrants, or court orders, it costs them money, so they get reimbursed. The FBI makes these requests and reimbursements to discover evidence and run relevant to a criminal investigation. Let me repeat that. The FBI makes these requests to help catch the bad guys. That helps keep child predators off social media sites. It helps keep violent criminals off our streets. I support the FBI and our law enforcement agencies. It would be nice if our Republican colleagues did the same and not fabricate explanations for payments that are defined for clear purposes in federal law. My time is just about wrapped up.
May I respond?
The truth is that social media companies are unregulated monoliths. They pose danger to individuals. They allow posts that bring harm, and that's the bottom line. That the other side will not tell you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman had no time to yield back, but I will let the gentleman, Mr. Schellenberger, respond. And I would also point out that I did not say what the FBI paid Twitter for. All I said was they paid Twitter $3.4 million.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. I didn't ask Mr. Schellenberger a question.
Yeah, but the witness wants to respond, and the witness have been invited our guests, and frankly, they've been attacked by the federal
government.
Well, please do that. I'm going to let Mr. Schellenberger answer that before recognizing Mr. Bishop.
So are you going to do that as we move down the line of questioners?
The gentleman has not been recognized. You had your 5 minutes, and frankly, I think that's at the discretion of the chair. Mr. Schellenberger, you can respond briefly.
I'll be brief, which is that my understanding from those files is that Twitter had decided not to take that money until recently. So if you read that email, what Stasha, I believe, the person that sent it, is saying is that they started taking money after previously not taking it. And I believe that the reason that they had not taken it earlier was because they did not want that financial conflict clouding their relationship.
Mr. Chairman, the money is payment under federal law so that they can
The gentleman
recoup
from North
costs
Carolina, Mr. Bishop, is
for
recognized for
the
5
material
minutes.
that they've been asked
I thank the
for. That's
gentleman.
bottom line.
Mr. Taibbi, would you care to, I'm down here on this end, sir. Would you care to respond to the attack on your ethics? You weren't given really an opportunity to answer. And if you'd be brief, I've got a bunch of stuff I want to ask you as well.
Sure, just quickly, that moment on the Joe Rogan show, I was actually recounting a section from Seymour Hersh's book, Reporter, where he described a scene where the CIA gave him a story, and he was very uncomfortable. He said that I, who had always gotten the secrets, was being handed the secrets. Look, again, I've done lots of whistleblower stories. There's always a balancing test that you make when you're given material, and you're always balancing newsworthiness versus the motives of your sources. In this case, the newsworthiness clearly outweighed any other considerations, and I think everybody else who worked on the project agreed.
Doesn't it seem like any reporter who breaks a blockbuster story is going to get attention, and there may be even financial consequences that follow? It seems like as surely as the night follows the day, that's the case, right?
That is true, although I would like to clear up, some things that have been misrepresented. Not one of us has actually been paid to do any of this work. We've all, traveled on our own. We've hired our personnel on our own, and I've just hired a pretty large team to investigate this issue out of my own pocket.
The fact that the attempt comes from the dais across the aisle to smear you, frankly, I think liberals, if I understand that, in your background, you're both good liberals, and you come in the Democrats' hostility to what you've undertaken is astonishing to behold, but it's part of the picture we're seeing. In Twitter Files number 15, Mr. Taibbi, you exposed Hamilton 68, a website associated with the German Marshall Fund that purported in a dashboard to identify Russian bot networks and became ubiquitously cited by media to identify media stories or narratives that supposedly flowed from Russia. From Russia! You showed that the front man for Hamilton 68 was Clint Watts, a former FBI agent. At Twitter, the trust and safety executives were ridiculing Hamilton 68 for the ludicrous identifications that it was making, which they could reverse engineer and figure out who those accounts were. And then in Twitter Files number 17, after disclosing Mr. Watts' identity, you disclosed that J.M. Berger is the creator of Hamilton 68. And guess what? He was a federal contractor, right?
He was, yes. He denies that he worked on it for the Global Engagement Center, but he was an employee of theirs until about a month before the dashboard's release.
Just a month before it, he said, I believe publicly, that that the dashboard was the product of 3 years' work. So doesn't it beg sort of the intriguing question whether the creation of this fraudulent Hamilton 68 dashboard was effectively underwritten by government funding?
Yes, I think that's a good question. Certainly the German Marshall Fund, which is the NGO that is at the top of the chain in this organization. It's the German Marshall Fund, then the Alliance for Securing Democracy, and then Hamilton 68. They're a federal contractor. They received over $1 million from the Department of Defense. They're the board of the Alliance for Securing Democracy, has a former acting head of the CIA, a former deputy head of the NSA, a former chief of the DHS on it. So
I want to make, and the bigger point is hard because the examples sometimes start making it. I want to introduce you to, or introduce the country to somebody else. I think you've mentioned it in one of your writings, Richard Stengel. You know who that is?
Yes, he's the former, the first head of the Global Engagement Center.
I want the American people to hear from him for 30 seconds.
Basically, every country creates their own narrative story. And my old job at the State Department was what people used to joke as the chief propagandist job. We haven't talked about propaganda. Propaganda, I'm not against propaganda. Every country does it, and they have to do it to their own population.
Every country does it. Every country does propaganda, and they have to do it to their own people, is what Mr. Stengel said. If I understand correctly, he was the head of the Global Engagement Center at its creation, right?
He was, and in his book, Information Wars, there are a number of passages where he talks about creating a whole-of-government solution to the information problem. He hastened to say that he didn't want to create a, quote, information ministry, but what he was describing roughly approximates that.
In the half minute I've got left, he also was associated with Hamilton 68, right?
The Global Engagement Center certainly had ties to Hamilton 68.
I think it's closer than that. That'll come out.
Okay. Well, I'd be anxious to hear that.
I hope I'll get yielded in a minute or two from somebody else down the way. There's all sorts of stuff to disclose. This committee has to uncover not that single instance, but this system that you have described. This is the hope that Americans have to set this right. This committee. And that hostility shows what we're up against. It's not 3 pillars to the system, it is 4. And you're seeing the left move to crush you and anybody else who tries to expose this. I yield.